a priceless truffle vanishes, leaving behind only suspicion. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing our mystery-loving community grow. Your comments always make these stories come alive. Let's begin. I was halfway through not reading the afternoon paper when Fritz marched into the office with a wooden box cupped in his hands like the Holy Grail had taken up carpentry. Fritz Brenner doesn't march unless something in the kitchen has invaded his blood pressure, and the look he gave me said the Reichstag could have burned again and he'd have cared less. I folded the paper, stowed it where important documents go when Wolfe isn't looking, the wastebasket, and gave the box the once-over. It was handsome as boxes go, oiled walnut, brass hasp, and a red wax seal impressed with a crowned boar. Somebody had taste and money and an idea about branding mushrooms like banknotes. From the way Fritz inhaled over it, you'd think the thing was exhaling poetry. "Archie," he said, and his voice had the same quiver it gets when Wolfe tells him a sauce is merely good instead of perfect. This arrived by hand from Rustermans. Monsieur Gauthier sent it. It is the truffle. The truffle. If you think Fritz capitalizes words with tone, you're right. "Congratulations," I said. "Tell it to roll over." He shot me a look that could have curdled cream. "This is the tuba magnatum pico reserved for the Thursday dinner, 19 ounces from Alba, the heaviest this season, ripened under a white oak. They dug it with a silver spade at dawn. Do you not smell it?" He tilted the lid a hair, like a priest cracking a reliquary. I didn't have to go closer. Even that slit let loose a scent big enough to furnish an apartment. Garlic without the bite, forest after rain, and a heavy bass note of something indecent that makes truffle hounds paw the earth and millionaires paw their wallets. It ambled across the room and tapped my nose politely. On the far side of the desk, Nero Wolfe's eyelids rose one click. Wolfe had been doing his early afternoon ritual, leaning back in the yellow chair that was built for him the way the Parthenon was built for Athena, regarding a book on Latin prose without betraying whether it amused or offended him, and sipping beer with the judicious regularity of a metronome. His lips, which consider smiling a vulgarity, thinned. If you doubt a smell can reach straight into a man's childhood, you've never watched Wolfe register truffle. He didn't say good, because that would have been gushy. He said, "Put it on the table, Fritz," which is his version of throwing his hat in the air. Fritz didn't move. "I do not put it down, sir. I put down a problem." Wolfe's eyelids came up another click. "A problem? Yes, it is not the truffle." I leaned in. "If that's talcum powder, I'll eat my hat." Fritz shook his head, mouth set. "The odor is real, but it is adulterated. Masked. Underneath—" He glanced down at the box as if it might overhear. "Underneath it is wrong, and the weight is not right. Monsieur Gauthier sent our man with it because he feared a substitution. Wolfe didn't take the box. He doesn't take things. He lets them come to him." I carried it over and set it on the edge of his desk, between the Montenegrin paperweight and the stack of bills that I've proposed using as kindling and been overruled. He unlatched the hasp, lifted the lid 2 inches, and breathed in like a violinist tuning to A. His eyes closed. For a man whose eyebrows can express a paragraph, he kept it to a sentence. Someone has misbehaved. "Rustermans thinks it's a swap," I said. "They want their mushroom back before Thursday, or they have to tell 16 gentlemen why their entree tastes like money burned under garlic." "Rustermans," he murmured, and the syllables had ballast. Wolfe owns a controlling interest in Rustermans, and while he rarely darkens its door, he guards its reputation the way a mother hawk guards a nest. "Fritz." Fritz's hands were tight as whisks. "Gauthier telephoned from Rustermans 2 hours ago. He expected the courier at noon. The courier arrived late. The seal," he pointed at the wax, "is theirs, but the impression is imperfect. Our man did not like the look of it and brought the box to me at once. I telephoned him back. He says the truffle was in there safe from morning until the courier came, but he had, how do you say, disturbances. Disturbances? I said. A riot at the salad station? 2 visitors, Fritz said grimly. A gentleman with too much cologne and a lady with too much voice. Each had business. Each insisted. He sent them away, and then he had a call, anonymous, to ask if he had insured the truffle. Wolfe's eyes opened. They weren't interested. They were amused, which is worse. Far. A dunce's prank. He lifted the truffle with 2 fingers the size of Nuremberg sausages and turned it gently in the air. The skin was marbled and pale as a moon, trying to remember how to glow. He set it down in its bed of rice as tenderly as you'd set down a baby. "It is a truffle," he said. "It is also an affront. There's a whisper of petroleum. This has been in proximity to a solvent, not for long. Long enough." "You can smell petroleum through that?" I asked. I might as well have asked the sun if it could manage light. "I can," he said. "So can Fritz. The weight?" Fritz swallowed. 17 ounces. 2 missing, Wolfe said. "That's imbecile." He leaned back and stared at the ceiling like it had written him an offense. A thief with a chisel for a brain. He took enough to profit, but not enough to make detection immediate. "He, you got a name with that pronoun?" I asked. "Archie." He shut his eyes again. Not because he was tired of me, though I understand the temptation, but because he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Either a theft at the restaurant, the courier suborned or coerced, or a substitution en route. The wax tells tales. The rice bed is freshened, see? But not in Rusterman's fashion. They scent the rice lightly with fennel, and this is plain. Whoever prepared this box did not have the chef's habits. We will not consult the police. "Because you don't like men who carry guns for a living," I said. "Because by Thursday evening either Rusterman's will serve a dignified dinner or Gauthier will be undone and panic will scatter his wits." "I decline both," Wolfe said. "Call Mr. Gauthier. Tell him we are apprised and we will manage it. He will keep the matter sub rosa, the courier's name." "Paolo Neri," Fritz said, "an Italian boy with respectful hands. He has been dependable." "Respect," Wolfe said. "The piety of the incompetent. We shall see." Fritz flinched. I shot Wolfe a glare he didn't notice or pretended not to. You don't insult Fritz's kitchen by calling anyone connected to eat incompetent unless you're aiming for frostbite. But if Wolfe was taking the case, and that's what it smelled like, petroleum and all, he was tuning the room to his pitch. He does it without moving a muscle. "You're taking this," I said. "I am preventing an insult from standing," he said. "Also, I'm curious." The corner of his mouth twitched, which for him is a Charleston. "Curiosity is an appetite, Mr. Goodwin. It must be fed." Fritz exhaled, a man reprieved. "What shall I do?" "You will put the truffle in the cool pantry with a bowl of rice. You will not wash it. You will not shave it to test it. You will not weep over it. You will cook dinner as planned. There will be squab with walnut sauce. You will not overbrown." He flicked 2 fingers, and that, for Fritz, was a benediction. Fritz took the box like a paramedic with a donor heart and went out. I perched on the corner of the desk. "All right, maestro, I'll play. Where do I start?" "Nowhere until 4, he said, "because at 4 you will go to Rusterman's and see Mr. Gauthier. You will inspect his safe. You will speak with his visitors, the fragrant gentleman and the stentorian lady. You will also speak with Mr. Neri, learn whether his hands are still respectful or if they tremble. You will do this without causing talk." "That's me," I said. "Silent as snowfall." I reached for the phone. "Wait," Wolfe said. I waited. He didn't hurry. He was thinking, which is the only time he allows himself exercise. "There is one more thing missing," he said. "Besides 2 ounces of fungus and some fennel rice." Besides that, he eyed the book, The window, the beer. Someone has entered my house by proxy. I tilted my head. Come again? The Brownstone is not a restaurant, he said. But certain reputations link our kitchen to Rustermann's, and certain men, Gauthier among them, rely on me as a guarantor of standards. When they tamper with his provisions, they tug at my sleeve. He made a face, delicate and annoyed. I dislike being tugged. Whoever engineered this wishes to make me uncomfortable. Maybe he only wants to make a buck, I said. Pfui, he said. He could have taken the whole truffle and left a potato in its place. That would be lucre. This is a message. To you. To me, he said, and his voice went flat. And to Rustermann's. And to Fritz, who will not sleep if the rice is wrong. We will return the truffle to wholeness by dinner Thursday. Unless the thieves ate the missing 2 ounces, I said, in which case we'll return it spiritually. He closed his eyes again. Call Mr. Gauthier. I did. Gauthier is a capable man with the soul of a nervous metronome. When I told him we were apprised, Wolfe's word, he had a lot of French opinions about couriers, wax seals, and insurers, which I sorted into piles labeled useful, colorful, and later. Useful included the fact that the fragrant gentleman had asked for a tour of the kitchen and the stentorian lady had asked for a reservation she could not possibly pay for, both at the same hour, because fate enjoys humor. Later included the insurance call, which he insists was a prank until I told him not to insist. When I hung up, Wolfe had his eyes open and his face in neutral. You're enjoying this, I said. No, he said. I am being used. I propose to discover by whom. He lifted the beer, looked at the foam, and set it down untouched. That was the tell. For Wolfe to neglect a head on his beer, something had tilted the Earth's axis. 4 o'clock, he said. Until then, Archie, kindly remove your person from my chair's line of sight. You obstruct my view of indignity. I shifted an inch. Better? Marginally. Outside, the city ran its spoons along its bars and made the music it makes. Inside, the Brownstone held its breath. I've seen it expectant, offended and fed. This was different. Somebody had tossed a pebble in the pond and the ripples had ideas. When a man tells you he's being used and smiles with his eyes closed, either he's lying or he's Nero Wolfe and he's just decided which course he wants for Thursday. Spoiler, it didn't come from the menu. At 4, I went to pay my respects to civilization, which is another way of saying Rustermann's kitchen at the ugly hour between lunch and dinner. The dining room was in its afternoon undress, linen ghosts draped on chairs, the bar gleaming like it had taken a vow, and a single florist's boy confessing a dozen white roses into a tall crystal vase. In back, where the serious verbs live, braise, reduce, terrify, the air had that compound smell of competence. Bones roasting low, wine sweating, in a pan, citrus peel getting acquainted with sugar, and men who know the difference between heat and haste. Gauthier met me at the swinging door in a jacket that would have fit an accountant if the accountant had borrowed it from a bullfighter. His hair was combed to a philosophy, and his eyes were conducting 2 different orchestras, one for panic, one for pride. He took my hand as if he meant to keep it. If I'd sold gloves, I'd have made a killing. Goodwin, he said, and made my name sound like a concession to reality. Monsieur Wolfe will save me. That depends, I said, on how much you've done to deserve it. Let me see the safe. He flung an arm and led me down a corridor past cold rooms that could have hidden a cavalry. The safe lived in a niche across from the pastry station, a matte black vault with a dial that had probably cried in its youth and gotten over it. 2 men were pretending not to be guarding it. One had a mustache that believed in itself, the other was rolling a towel between his hands like it was a rosary. Gauthier shooed them and knelt to spin the dial. If there are secular sacraments, he performed one. The door opened with a sigh that told me somebody had oiled hinges with a lover's hand. "You changed the oil recently?" I asked. He stiffened. "We service it. Weekly." "Who is we?" "The building's man. Mr. Coates." "Coates uses petroleum solvent," I said. "It is New York," Gauthier said. "Everything uses petroleum." Inside, the shelves were lined with green bays that had seen important guests. A ledger sat in the left corner with entries in a chef's hand. Precise. Resentful. There was a faint smell like a well-groomed garage. That wasn't conclusive by itself. Kitchens clean with a cocktail of moral certainties and degreasers. Still, a truffle that had napped here would leave with a souvenir on its skin. "Tell me the sequence," I said. "From morning to noon." He did, and he was good. That's what you get with a man who measures time by stock reduction. The white truffle arrived at 9 in the personal custody of a broker named Bellini, Marco, with a receipt that had more flourishes than a tenor. Gauthier weighed it, admired it, and put it in the safe swaddled like a duchess. He sealed the Rustermann's box in the office with the crowned boar wax, the one they use for high ceremony, golden goose, breast chicken, Alba truffle, and put that in the safe too. No one else had the combination but him and the owner's man, a sommelier named Rafe Klein, who, rumor whispered, could sniff a vintage from the year Noah planted vines. The courier from Rustermann's suppliers, Paolo, was due at noon. "Then your matinee," I said. "The visitors." He lifted his palms. Madame Pike, the columnist. She arrived at 11:20 with a laugh that went to college and never graduated. She wished a table for Thursday. She wished also to see the truffle as if it were a debutante. I said no to the first, never to the second. Then, 10 minutes later, Monsieur Dax. It's a rich town. If you open a door at random, you hit a man with money and a hobby. Monsieur Dax turned out to be a gentleman named Cyril Dax, who imports scents and sells them to women who don't need them and men who do. He had a suit that had an opinion and a cologne that had two. He wanted a tour. He always wants a tour. The price of being a patron is seeing the machinery. Gauthier gave him 10 minutes of copper pots and thermometers, then directed him toward the exit with a smile sharp enough to cut ribbon. At 11:48, the phone on Gauthier's desk rang, and a disguised voice, genderless, mid-Atlantic, the accent of bad radio, asked if the truffle was insured. He told the voice that Rustermann's did not discuss insurance with anonymous tadpoles and hung up. At 11:58, Paolo Neri arrived late. That is what late means, being 2 minutes early for noon. "Why late?" I asked. Gauthier lifted his eyebrows like a stage curtain. "He says a truck kissed his bicycle on 10th Avenue. Let me meet him." We did it in the alley behind the kitchen, where a line cook with a cigarette was explaining life to the trash. Paolo had the small bones and large hands of an earnest boy who will grow into a man if luck lets him. He was 19 if he was anything. His hair was black and obeyed him. His eyes were brown and would have obeyed anyone who talked like a priest. He held his cap and watched me as if I might confiscate his future. "I'm not the police," I told him. "That's good news for both of us. Walk me through it. Start when you woke up. Skip any dreams that feature movie stars." He smiled because he had to, then told it. He left the supplier's office at West 46th with a chain bag for papers and a metal case for the truffle box. He locked the case and clipped it to his bike with a chain the thickness of his hopes. On 10th, a delivery truck nosed out where it shouldn't, brushed his rear wheel, and made him avoid impressing his face on a hydrant. He did not fall. He did unclip to steady. When he arrived at Rustermann's, he showed the counterman his card, signed the ledger, and waited for Gauthier. The chef himself brought the box from the office safe. Paolo watched him open the safe. He watched him put the sealed box into the metal case. He watched him lock it. He says he watched. "And in between," I said, "you had a cigarette with the sous chef, eloped with a waitress, and pawned the case. He swallowed. No, sir. Your hands, I said. They tremble. He held them out. They were steady as a $10 watch, which is steadier than some. I took them and turned them over. The pads had rice dust in the lines. That could have been transferred a dozen ways in a kitchen, but a Truffle's cradle is rice and rice talks. You smell like a gas station, I said mildly. He flinched like I'd said murderer. My friend in the building, he fixes Vespers. This morning I help him turn a wrench, only 5 minutes. I wash. I wash good. I swear. I filed that. Petroleum on a boy who loves a scooter is not a thunderbolt. Petroleum on a Truffle that has never owned a carburetor is an aria. Back in the office, I asked for the box the Truffle should have left in. Gautier produced the twin, a Rusterman's box with the crowned boar seal, but this one had the impression clean and proud. He set it next to the one that had visited us. The difference wasn't a shout, it was a smirk. The real seal had crisp ridges. The other had been pressed by a stamp that was just slightly out of true, as if someone had copied a signature with a glove on. Where is your stamp kept? I asked. In my desk, he said, and opened a drawer to show me a compartment with velvet. The stamp lay there like a prince. The wax sticks were beeswax and resin with a thread of pine. The used wick ends lay in a small dish. I sniffed. Pine, yes. Not the faint paraffin I'd caught on the Truffle's skin. Show me your rice, I said. He blinked. The rice you sent the Truffle bed with. Fennel, Wolfe said. If you tell me you never sent the rice, I'll call him and let you listen to his opinion. He surrendered. In the cold room, a small covered pan held a bed of short-grain rice that smelled faintly of fennel seed and good intentions. The grains were dusted with a whisper of olive oil. Gautier said it kept the aroma even. The rice in the box that arrived at the brownstone had been plain, unscented, and slightly chalky. Somebody had packed the box elsewhere, without the kitchen's habits. That didn't mean the theft had happened outside. It meant the thief hadn't rehearsed here. Let's collect dramatis persona, I said, and ticked them off on a finger that prefers not to count. Marco Bellini, the broker who delivered. Rafe Klein, who shares safe privileges with you. Mr. Coates, who oils things for a living. Madame Theodora Pike of The Voice. Cyril Dex, whose business is selling fragrances that give people ideas. And Paolo, who has respectful hands and an unrespectful friend in a Vespa cave. You will speak to them? Gautier asked. Most, I said. Some require Mr. Wolfe's tone of voice, which we rent by the hour. We started with Dax because he was easiest. He had left a card and a statement in the air that he might be at the Owls Club until 5. I found him in the dining room, which doesn't open until dinner, because rules are for those without a perfume account. He was studying the crystal like it owed him money. Up close, the cologne introduced itself before he did. Mr. Dax, I said, and introduced myself in return. I hear you like tours. I'm offering one of a different department. The Truth. He smiled as if his teeth had just gotten back from Europe. Charming. Truth is a harsh scent on most men, Mr. Goodwin. I prefer ambiguity with citrus top notes. You asked to see the Truffle, I said. I asked to see many things, he said. It is a disease of patronage. You were sent away. Ah, he said, and his lips tightened in a way that said he remembered a woman once who had done the same. Monsieur Gautier is determined to preserve the mystique. Good for him. Will it last? He raised his brows at me like we were conspirators. Thursday is the dinner. Have you a table for me? I collect experiences. You collect a lot, I said. What do you do with what you can't keep? I fragrance it, he said, and enjoyed himself. Is there a problem? If there is, you're smelling it, I said, and your presence doesn't help. He laughed. Mr. Goodwin, I can make an exit as well as an entrance. He rose, made an exit that tried to be both, and left behind a trace you could have followed across a state line. Madame Pike was a different instrument. We met her at the host's stand because gravity demanded it. She had a hat with a wing and a laugh that knew where it was going. When I told her who I was, she fluffed like a bird, deciding whether the breadcrumb offends it. She had wanted a Thursday table, yes. She wanted to write about the fragrant splendors of autumn. She wanted also, and she didn't mind saying so, to be the first to put the word Alba in 60,000 kitchens via newsprint. Would she blackmail a restaurant? Don't be asinine. Would she suggest a friendly mention in exchange for a corner banquette? She called it symbiosis. And the truffle? I said. She tilted her head. Darling, a truffle is like a secret. Half the pleasure is that not everyone gets any. Did you make a phone call at 11:48? I asked. Anonymous voice? Insurance gossip? She widened her eyes in an imitation of innocence that would have fooled a man who wanted to be fooled. If I had, I would have disguised my voice better. But no. At 11:48 I was dictating to my typist, and she will swear to it because she fears me. I do hope this is all drummed up for drama, because if any portion of the White Queen goes missing, I shall be inconsolable. She meant it in a column-inch way, not a culinary way. I got Rafe Klein between racks of glasses. He was long and dried like the inside of a violin case, with eyes that checked your label, and then your soul. He had the other number to the safe and the other key to the liquor cage. He resented both responsibly. You opened the safe this morning? I asked. No, he said. I examined the ledger at 10, but Gautier had the door shut and spun. He is possessive of fungi. You were here at 11:48. He looked at me like I'd asked whether wine is wet. I'm here until 2 in the morning, and at 11:48 I was auditing the cellar list because our patron with the cologne confused Bordeaux with a mirror. Do you know Bellini? Professionally, he said, which in his tone meant biblically would have been more pleasant. He has very fine truffles and too many stories. And Coates? The maintenance man. He smells like his work and wants a raise. Don't we all? I said. I let the kitchen breathe and took a slow lap of the perimeter, which is a technique that occasionally convinces a fact to show you its better profile. Nothing else leaped and shouted. A busboy had a bruise on his forearm that looked like a door had expressed itself. A pantry woman had an opinion about fennel in rice, but it was theological, not criminal. When I got back to Gautier's office, he was cradling the unholy box as if it might repent. Anything? He asked. Opinions and aroma, I said. I'll take the box. Mr. Wolfe will want to compare the wax and rice and whatever else it whispers to him when the house is quiet. He hesitated only long enough to prove to himself that he was hesitating. Then he let go. I locked the thing in my case and clicked it twice, a sound I like better than applause. On my way out, I nearly walked into a man with a toolbox who wore his cap low and his mouth lower. His hands were clean in the way that means they've been recently introduced to soap after a relationship with grease. The name on his breast said, Coates. He nodded at me like gravity had him by the chin. Maintenance? I asked. Something squeaks, he said. Clean hinges, I said. Clean conscience. He gave me a look that wasn't a smile and wasn't not. Depends what door, he said, and moved past. Outside, the air had an early evening chill that makes New Yorkers square their shoulders and pretend it's character. I pointed myself toward West 35th and the brownstone with a mental list that had begun to arrange itself. The list said this: the seal is a forgery or a cousin. The rice is wrong. The solvent is right if you're a safe, wrong if you're a fungus. The courier smells like scooters. The columnist smells like leverage. The cologne king smells like himself. The sommelier smells insulted by most of humanity. The maintenance man smells like a door that opens when it should not. Somewhere in that bouquet was the nose Wolfe would follow. I called ahead from a corner drugstore to say I was inbound with the patient. Fritz answered, and did not waste words. If you think a Swiss can't worry efficiently, you've never heard one boil syllables. When I got home, Wolfe was in his chair, the room had its evening stillness, and the truffle box sat where I'd left it, perfectly, insolently itself. I put Rustermann's box beside it. He didn't touch them. He just looked, which in his case is a verb that does the work of 10 fingers. "Well," he said, "we have suspects with aroma, and suspects with motive, and one suspect who oils things and makes remarks," I said. "Also, we have a safe that has been serviced within smelling distance, a broker named Bellini who loves flourishes, and a courier who helped a friend with a Vespa." "Pfui," he said softly. "Vespas." "Don't get continental on me," I said. "The big question is where this box got dressed. Not in Rustermann's, no fennel rice, sloppy seal. It was done by someone who either didn't know the ritual or didn't care to copy it well. The theft could have been at the source with a duplicate stamp, or it could have been in transit with a quick swap, or, least likely, it could have been in Gauthier's office while he was being charming at a decibel he disapproves." Wolfe shut his eyes, and for 10 seconds the room held only the faint hum a city makes when it pretends it's sleeping. Then he opened them and pointed at the smaller fact I'd almost enjoyed missing. "The rice dust in the courier's finger lines," he said. "Kitchen transfer," I said. "He was near the station." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "Or he lifted the truffle. If Paolo stole 2 ounces, I'll buy him a scooter," I said. "He wouldn't nick a duchess with a butter knife. He'd faint." "Sentiment," Wolfe said. "Observations. Dax wants to be everywhere important is. Pike wants to be first to write about it. Klein wants the world to have better manners. Coates wants things to squeak less. Bellini wants to be paid. Gauthier wants dignity. Fritz wants his fennel back. You—" I stopped. "I?" he asked. "You want your house not tugged," I said. He breathed once, slow. "Yes." We left it there because Fritz came in with the tray and dinner doesn't like to compete with rancor. But as I set the napkin and the bottle and the plate where they belong, I noticed something I should have noticed sooner. On the far corner of Wolfe's desk, where my pen tray lives, a sheet of notepaper sat slightly askew. It shouldn't have. I square the corners by reflex. I reached to nudge and stopped. The paper had a grainy smear, like someone's thumb had met it after meeting something chalky. Rice dust is chalky. So are wax scrapings. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking, "if you disarranged my desk in my absence, I shall remonstrate." "I didn't," I said, "which is the problem." He turned his head a fraction. I showed him the smear. He didn't move otherwise. He didn't have to. The brownstone had been perfectly itself a few hours ago. Now it was itself plus a suggestion. Somebody had moved a thing a 1/4 inch and told us a story. "Fritz," he called, as calmly as if he were asking for paprika. "Has anyone entered this room since Mr. Goodwin and I left for the plant rooms?" "No, sir," Fritz said from the doorway, unhappy that the answer was true. Wolfe looked at the paper, then at me. "Subtle trespass," he said. "At last." "Next time," I said, "let's hope it knocks." "It already has," he murmured. "We shall answer." Fritz didn't like that word. Trespass. Even qualified with subtle. He stood in the doorway as if the jam had to be punished for letting the syllables through. I slid the blotter forward with 2 fingers and held it under the light. The smear had no color to speak of, just a dullness where paper should have been crisp. I touched it and got a faint drag on the skin, the kind you get from cheap wax shavings or flour. Wolfe didn't move, but I could feel him evaluating the amount of air in the room. "Fritz," he said. "The front door. In the last 2 hours. Who touched it?" "No one I did not see," Fritz said, which wasn't as comforting as he meant it to be. "Mr. Goodwin, you went out at 2:47. You returned at 6:22. The milk was delivered at 3. I was in the kitchen. Theodore called at 3:30 to ask for crushed ice for the plant room. I carried it. The bell rang at 4:15, flowers for Mr. Wolfe from an admirer, and I refused them. Flowers, I said. The admirer had a name? Fritz looked offended, which is the default setting when the world acts like the world. The card said only, "In gratitude for your standards." The roses were dyed blue. I'd told the boy to take them to whomever deserved them. "The florist's boy at Rusterman's," I said, thinking of him in his act with the crystal vase. Maybe the city hired a new breed of Cupid. "Blue roses," Wolfe said, as if the phrase were a diagnosis. "A florist's boy at 4:15. Very well. Theodore?" Fritz shook his head. He did not come down. He telephoned twice for ice and once to remind you of the misting schedule in the south room. "He is correct," Wolfe said, as if consoled by the universe having one reliable hinge. "Archie, the back door?" "Bolted," I said. "The alley gate has my padlock and my opinion of people written on it." He made a small motion, which in him is a trumpet solo. "Saul, if you're healthy, you keep a doctor. If you're careful, you keep a locksmith. If you're smart, you keep Saul Panzer." I dialed. He answered on the second ring with a hello that doesn't waste consonants. "Saul," I said, "we've had a minor in-house ballet. Someone put a toe on the brownstones carpet while we were in the plant rooms. No footprints, only a suggestion. We'd like eyes for the next 24. 2 beats, Rustermans. Look for a maintenance man named Coates, a sommelier named Klein, a broker named Bellini, and a courier named Paolo Neri. Second beat, our block. Anyone who pauses too long looking sentimental at our door, ask yourself what they love. You'll be compensated at the Wolfe is annoyed rate." "That's the good one," Saul said. "Anything special?" "Blue roses," I said. "And if a man smells like he's trying to sell you his childhood, that's Cyril Dax." "Got it," Saul said. "Starting now." I hung up and gave Wolfe the report. He nodded once, the way a magistrate acknowledges a clerk. Then he did something outrageous. He stood. Not all the way. The chair released him like a reluctant mother, and he rose the necessary inches to inspect the blotter under the lamp without delegating his eyes to me. He inhaled at close range, didn't touch, and sat back as if gravity had won a point. "Paraffin," he said. "Trace, and pine resonite. Not our wax." I had the box from Rusterman's on the corner, still locked, still wearing its smug seal. I put it on the blotter. He didn't want it there, but he let me. I took out my penknife, eased the edge under the wax, and pried a coin-sized crescent. Fritz made a sound, but it was etiquette, not objection. I flaked a grain off and held it to my nose. Beeswax and resin with that ghost of pine Gauthier liked. Clean, aromatic, righteous. Then I touched the smear on Wolfe's paper again and got the difference. Flat, utilitarian, penny cheap. If you've ever sniffed a canned candle at a 5 and dime and then a real taper in a church, you've had the comparison. "Someone who owns a sealing stamp," I said, "but not the right wax. Or someone who didn't think wax would tattle." "It always tattles," Wolfe said. "People attempt to imitate ritual and neglect the sacramentals." His eyes went to the desk edge, the angle of the pen tray, the place where the smear had been made. "The intruder stood there," he said. "He reached to that corner. Why? Not for money. Not for documents. There are none. For comparison." "The Rusterman's box," I said. He wanted to see it side by side, to gauge how good his work was. "Or," Wolfe said, "to take back a faulty sample." I sat down because my knees preferred chairs to Epiphany. "You think he brought the wrong wax to copy our seal, saw his mistake, and came here to swap his dab of the cheap for a fleck of the right?" "Archie," he said, "if this is a ballet, the choreographer is not Balanchine, more like a tobacconist on his lunch break. But yes, He pressed his counterfeit seal elsewhere, observed that the impression lacked the crispness of the original, and realized the fault might lie not only in the stamp, but in the medium. He came here to smell our wax. That's devotion, I said. Or panic. Panic, he said. And temerity. He entered my house. Delivery boy at 4:15, I said. Blue roses. Front door opens. Fritz is heroic in refusal. The boy leaves. While we're still musing, someone takes the knob for a second try. Or the boy palms a door wedge, comes back. Or, if I wanted to annoy you on a budget, I'd use the basement hatch and a skeleton key for the inner door. That lock is not improvisable, Wolfe said. You improved it last spring. You noticed, I said. I notice everything you do to my house, he said, as if confessing a weakness. I rang the bell for Fritz and had him bring the blue rose card. He had salvaged it, not because he's sentimental about paper, but because he files offenses. The card was heavy stock, good taste trying too hard. The hand was a stylish nothing in black ink. In gratitude for your standards. No signature. No watermark. Archie, Wolfe said, indulge in inquiry. Always. Perfume. It hung there like an accusation I hadn't expected. I sniffed the card. It had a thin metallic brightness, the kind some modern houses call white flowers, but which smelled to me like a clean shirt invented by a liar. It didn't shout. It suggested it would be around later if you wanted to approve of yourself. Dax, I said. He leaves a trace. He leaves samples, Wolfe said. Men in his trade salt rooms. The card offers that tang. Which makes the roses a calling card, I said. Not an admirer, a patron with hobbies. He sends flowers at 4:15, gets refused at the door, and maybe the florist's boy is only a florist's boy, and maybe he's a hinge. Wolfe shut his eyes and was still. The room tightened around him, not because anything moved, but because thinking has weight. When he opened them, he had a list. You will go out again, he said. First to Bellini's office on West 46th. He's a man who makes flowery speeches about earthy things. Ask him for his supplier log and his receipt books, and do not leave before you see the embosser's invoice for Rusterman's wax seal. Second, the Owl's Club. If Mr. Dax is there, you will convey my compliments, which are this. That Rusterman's does not take well to seasoning, and neither do I. If he sent me blue roses, he will send me the truth. Third, Mr. Coates, find his lair. I want to know whether he services safes with paraffin-based solvents and whether he possesses an impression of a crowned boar. And if he doesn't, then he knows who does, Wolfe said. These men are a guild. They gossip. And Klein? Klein will simmer until tomorrow. He will not boil over. If he does, we will fix him with ice. He flicked his eyes toward the stairs. Theodore will be expecting me at 9. I will not disappoint him. I'll try not to disappoint anybody, I said. But my calendar is already ambitious. You can do much when you are not chattering, he said. Touché, I said, and went for my hat. New York at 7 is theater, with or without stages. Bellini's office had more velvet than a morals court. A woman with a mouth made for refusing men told me Marco was in the back admiring invoices. I said I would admire them with him. She said I would not. I showed her my smile and told her Nero Wolfe would admire her if she helped me, and she decided life might be more interesting if she was 5 minutes late to her next refusal. Bellini was my height minus a tip jar, with cufflinks that could have hosted a pigeon. His handshake was warm and damp, not criminal in itself, but a bad precedent. Mr. Goodwin, he sang. The Truffle. Ah, the Truffle. It was the bride of the morning. I wept to see it go. Save your tears, I said. I need the paperwork. The Alba certificate, the weight ticket, the courier ledger, and the embosser's invoice for Rusterman's seal. He tried to be puzzled, then tried to be offended, then settled on theatrical. He showed me a parchment that looked like a diploma for a mushroom. It had the right stamps and the right squiggles. He showed me a weight ticket, 19 ounces, bragged and countersigned. He showed me the courier ledger, where Paolo's neat signature sat like a saint in a niche. When I said embosser's invoice, he blinked. "We don't emboss," he said, shocked at the idea. "That is Rusterman's romance. The wax and the stamp are theirs." "Always?" "Always," he said, and meant it. "I send my product in my crate. They rehouse it in their ceremony." "Anybody else ask to borrow your stage props?" I asked. "A restaurant, they all think they are cathedrals. Or a gentleman who enjoys rehearsals." "No," he said. "Who is rehearsing?" "Someone who will flub the opening," I said, and left him to his indignation. If he was lying, it was an operetta, and I had a ticket to a different show. At the Owls, Dax had a leather corner and an audience of 2 women who looked better at a distance and a man who didn't look good anywhere. He saw me and dismissed them with a squeeze of the air. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I was about to send you a drink in the hope it would purify me." "You should bathe in truth," I said. "Wolfe's compliments. Did you send blue roses?" He smiled, pleased to be accused. "I send blue anything if it amuses me." "Blue roses with a card about standards. Did you also send a boy back to wedge a door, or were you content with metaphor?" His gaze flicked, not to the exits. That would have been honest. But to his cuff, where his watch thought well of him. "You think I enter houses by floriography. I enter houses by invitation." "You asked for a tour," I said. "I always ask for tours," he said. "It satisfies them to refuse me." "And the card," I said, and slid it across the low table. He sniffed the air as if the card gave off praise. He didn't touch it. "A labacord," he said. "Not mine. Too much aldehyde. Whoever chose it wanted to smell clean and ended it sterile." "Then you didn't send this," I said. He lifted a shoulder. "If I sent it, I would have signed it. My name has better sillage than anonymous." "And yet you smelled the Truffle room at noon," I said. "What did you smell besides your self-regard?" He laughed. "Mr. Goodwin, your insults are less expensive than my cologne and last longer. I smelled nervousness, and a hint of something industrial where it did not belong." "Paraffin," I said. "Possibly," he said. "I do not bottle paraffin." I pocketed the card and left him to his reliquary. Next was Coates, who did not have a club but did have a basement suite beneath the restaurant where the building kept the things buildings keep. Pipes with opinions, a rack of mops, and a room where solvents sat on a shelf rehearsing their harmonic overtones. Coates was there with a rag, not making anything cleaner but keeping the rag honest. He watched me look and let me see him watch. "You service the safe," I said. "I service lots," he said. "You use paraffin," I said. "Cheaper," he said. "Does the job if you know what you're doing." "You got a lathe?" I asked. "Why would I?" he said, which wasn't an answer. "For making small circles of metal that look like other small circles of metal," I said. "Like a seal head. Crowned boar." He looked at my shoes, which had done nothing to him. "I don't carve pigs," he said. "But I know a fella on Canal who'll make you a duplicate of your mother if you bring him a photograph. He does belt buckles and lies about them." "Name?" I asked. He considered his rate and my face. Ellie Corman. Corman engraving. He takes cash and cigarettes. He likes roses," he added, and did not mean flowers. "If he did you something this week, he'll say he didn't, but his bin's sloppy." I thanked him with a neutrality that left room for later. On the corner, I called Saul and fed him Corman. He grunted in a way that meant he was already turning a corner that wasn't mine. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the house had done its trick of going solemn without creaking. Fritz opened before I touched the bell, which is one of his ways of admitting he was listening for me. He took my hat and my case as if they had been fatigued by the walk. Wolfe didn't ask for a report until I sat. Then he got it in order because he dislikes it when I make him sort the alphabet. He listened without moving, the way the moon listens to the tides. When I reached the part about Corman, his left eyebrow acknowledged the existence of human cunning. "So," he said, "the choreography improves. An engraver, a maintenance man with economy, a perfumer with style, a journalist with appetite, a broker with documents, and a boy with rice in his lines. We have our cast." "And our trespasser," I said. "He's the one with the wax on his thumb, unless you think Fritz has taken up forgery." "Leave Fritz out of your imbecilities," Wolfe said. "The trespasser came to measure himself. That implies urgency and fear of discovery. He will be clumsy again." "Then we make a surface he can't resist," I said. "Bait." "Bait," Wolfe agreed. "Tomorrow morning you will telephone Madame Pike and tell her that a rumor, anonymous and irresponsible, has reached you that Rustamans will not serve Alba on Thursday, but an inferior substitute infused with essence. You will express disdain for gossip and invite her to witness the opposite in my office at 6 this evening, when certain persons will attend a demonstration of honesty. You will also telephone Mr. Dax with the same invitation, but reserve him for the second half. He will not be able to resist being present for something others will report badly." "And the others?" I asked. "Mr. Klein because he is a conscience, Mr. Bellini because he is a witness, Mr. Coates because he is oil, and Mr. Neri because he is doubt," Wolfe said. "We will not yet inform the police. If we are mistaken, we will apologize, in Latin if necessary. Until then, our trespasser is welcome to return to inspect his handiwork. He will find new wax on my desk, of the wrong kind, placed where his thumb will go." I grinned at him. "You're going to salt your own crime scene." "I'm going to season it properly," he said and folded his hands. "We dine." We did, and it was squab with walnut sauce, and Fritz did not overbrown. But even Fritz's victories couldn't quiet the house entirely. Somewhere in the city, a man who had pressed a stamp into cheap wax was explaining to himself why he had done the right thing, and somewhere else, a man who sold fragrance was deciding which suit he would wear to a demonstration of honesty, and in a basement, an engraver was tossing a ring of metal into a bin where it would try to look like anything but what it was. The brown stone had been tugged. It was now pulling back. Mourning in our house is divided into 3 jurisdictions: Theodore's, Fritz's, and Wolfe's. If you think the city's zoning map is complicated, try finding a straight line between the south plant room and the breakfast table at 9:08. I run my commute with a coffee cup, which doubles as a diplomatic passport. When I slid into my chair with the paper, Wolfe was already at his, wallowing in the schedule of orchids with a look that would have wilted a cactus. He glanced up just long enough to certify that the world still had me in it and went back to making sure Roots behaved. I let him be and dialed Madame Pike first, because when you're going to pitch gossip to a professional, you want to do it before she's had time to decide what today's appetite is. Her typist got me, then lost me, and finally the voice itself did a little runway, walked down the line, and settled with a purr. "My dear Mr. Goodwin," as she sang, "tell me something I don't know." "Rarely a problem," I said. "Here's one. An anonymous rumor with a bad tailor says Rustamans will commit sacrilege on Thursday. Serve a counterfeit aroma to men who can afford the real gasoline." She chuckled. "Essence. The word is essence. Gasoline is what the little people pour into their work." "I've been called worse than little," I said. "Wolfe suggests a remedy. At 6 this evening he intends to demonstrate in his office, privately, that Rustamans will serve what Rustamans claims. You're invited to witness, not to sing. You can file a column when he says." There was a fractional pause while a mental ledger balanced scoop against vanity. "You tempt me, Mr. Goodwin. Discretion is not my most expensive habit, but it is the one I least like buying. If I come alone. My readers prefer me unaccompanied." "Charmed," I said. 6. Please don't wear something with feathers that molt. Don't tell me how to molt, she said, and rang off. Dax was next because men in suits with cologne want to be second. It lets them imagine they chose to be first. His secretary placed me, then replaced me with him, and I delivered the same invitation without the word rumor. He asked whether there would be fragrance. There will be food, I said. You may bring your nose. He liked that. And the cast? You can find out by attending instead of guessing. 6 sharp? I'm never sharp, he said. I'm rounded at the corners for elegance. I'll be there. Bellini put up more fight than the others because invoices are armor, and pity is a sword. He wanted to bring a lawyer. I told him to bring his certificate instead. He said he couldn't spare a delivery boy. I told him I wasn't asking for a boy. I was asking for him. He negotiated with himself until he agreed. Klein didn't negotiate. At 6, he said. I prefer correctness to theater. You may get both, I said. Then I will be annoyed and satisfied, he said, which for a sommelier was practically confetti. Coates required the basement phone and 3 rings of silence before a grunt. I identified myself, said demonstration, and heard him think about what a demonstration might demonstrate. He said he had work at 5. I sympathize, I said. It ends at 5:15. He began a sentence about overtime and found it had gotten lost. I'll stick my head in. Stick your whole person, I said, and didn't sweeten it. Paolo was last. I didn't want his yes to feel like a summons, but I did want his feet in our hall. He sounded like a boy who had been invited to recite in front of the class and expected a red pencil in his future. I don't want to be in trouble, sir, he said. You're not, I said. Unless you stay away, in which case you'll be in imagination, which is worse. 6. By the time the kitchen surrendered us to the office, Wolfe had done his morning obeisance to the orchids and his beer. I briefed him. He listened and gave a single nod that covered 6 separate satisfactions. Saul? Out since dawn, I said. He left a note. Corman engraving opens at 10. Saul will be their 10 o'clock shadow. Good, Wolfe said. The wax? I did your shopping, I said. Cheap paraffin and piney sticks from the 5 and dime. I set a scarcely visible crescent of the wrong stuff on the desk corner where our friend palmed my paper yesterday. He flicked his eyes to the spot and made a minuscule sound, the kind a general makes when a regiment aligns. Our guest is invited to test himself again. We shall not be discourteous if he accepts. He wasn't joking. I checked the doors and windows anyway, and because paranoia is a vitamin in my line, I laid a hair across the inner knob of the vestibule door and a sliver of onion skin across the top hinge. If you think that's theatrical, you've never found out the hard way that a man with a palm to spare can make a lock feel redundant. At 10:15, the phone rang, and Saul's voice came on, low and even. Corman took a walk in yesterday at 2, he said. Male, 5'8" in work boots and a cap, carrying a napkin with a greasy impression of something with tusks. Corman did him a stamp head in cheap brass, told him it would blur after 10 impressions, and charged him cash. The bin had a second, better piece. Same bore, but Corman says that was an old job for a restaurant with pretensions. He didn't remember the name. He remembered the pretensions. Description, I said. Could be Coates, Saul said. But Coates is taller. This guy had a scar under his left eye and chewed his lip when counting bills. You get a name? Corman didn't ask. He did pocket a matchbook the guy used. I borrowed it. From a bar on 11th called The Cask. Bless you, I said. Anything at Rusterman's? Your perfumer took a sniff at 9, left a trail. Your columnist sent a boy to hover and report whether anything exciting happened in the alley. He left when nothing did. Coates did 3 doors and a feeling. Paolo delivered a thing to a different restaurant and didn't wobble. Klein read a list and frowned in French. That's practically a sonnet, I said. Stay near Corman. If the scar returns, buy him a drink." "Already did," Saul said, and dropped. Wolfe looked pleased in the way glaciers are pleased when a suitable rock cracks. He instructed Fritz to cut a thin shaving from the truffle. "Thin, Fritz, you will not fillet, and to keep it under a glass cloche in the pantry until 6. Fritz, who would normally die before pre-shaving a truffle, died and resurrected on the spot because Wolfe had declared a sacrament. At noon, the doorbell measured out 4 dignified dings. The man on the stoop had a bouquet as blue as a lie, and a face like the possibility of tips. I kept him in the crack of the door and took the card between 2 fingertips like it had opinions. In the hall behind me, the house breathed shallow. "Who's it for?" I asked. "Mr. Wolfe," he said. "Same as yesterday, sir." "Same as yesterday, they go back," I said. "Who ordered them?" He was ready for that one. "The note says anonymous." "Who's paying?" "My boss," he said, and gave me a florist's name on Madison that did a brisk trade in virtue. "Consider this a public service," I said. "When the gentleman calls to ask whether Nero Wolfe accepted blue roses, tell him the gentleman may keep them to match his imagination." I closed the door without letting the bouquet's scent try to shake down our air. Then I checked the hair. Still proud. The onion skin. Still insolent. Our guest had not piggybacked on blue petals for the second act. Either he had nerves, or he had learned. After lunch, salmon with dill, as if to prove we retained taste in a city that sends blue roses. We split the day like a firm that bills by the meaningful hour. I went to the cask with my best impression of a man who comes to bars at 2 o'clock to find men who came before him. The cask had sawdust on the floor and television on the wall and patrons who were the kind of employed that involves standing up all day. The bartender had a philosophy about half an inch of head and poured accordingly. I set a matchbook on the bar with the ease of coincidence, ordered club soda to be newly respectable, and asked him whether he kept the book as a prop or a souvenir. He tried a non-committal shrug and discovered I hadn't ordered the shrug. "People take them," he said. "You the fire marshal?" "Ambition, sure," I said. "I'm trying to cook a little memory. I'm looking for a guy with a scar under his left eye who chews his lip counting, likes to make things that look like other things." "Cosmo," he said, because bartenders are a credit to their guild. "Comes in after the morning job. Grease under the nails, talks about machines like their girlfriends. Haven't seen him today." "Cosmo have a last name?" I asked. "Maybe he does," he said. I never got introduced that far. "He drink with anybody?" I asked. "A short guy who walks like he's lugged something heavy his whole life," he said, "and a kid with a bike helmet. You could fit him in your pocket, but you'd have to fold him first." Pocket boy with a helmet had a familiar outline, but I didn't let the bartender see me nod. "Tell Cosmo if he comes in that a man with a fondness for animals wants a word," I said. "The animal's a pig with a crown." "Sounds like Queens," he said, and went to bless someone else's glass. Back at the brownstone at 4, the house had the stretched feeling of a stage before curtain. Fritz had set chairs around Wolfe's desk at angles that could start an argument. The cloche under which the truffle shaving rested made the air above it purr. I shifted a chair an inch and caught Wolfe's eye. He gave me a look that said, "Keep your fingers to yourself and your mind on the door." At 5:30, the bell announced Klein, who came 10 minutes early to prove he was more disciplined than fate. He sat as if upholstery offended his knees. 5:45 brought Bellini, who had put on a tie in the shade called Desperate. He kissed the air in the direction of the cloche and then had the sense to pretend he hadn't. 6 on the button produced Madame Pike, who wore something without plumage but with a laugh that could have started a small rally. Dax followed 2 minutes later and soaked a square foot of carpet in invisible approval of himself. Paolo arrived last, breathless from pedaling and nerves, and hovered near the door until I pried him away and gave him a chair with arms so he'd have something to grip. "Mr. Coates?" Wolfe asked me quietly. Absent, I said. Either conscience or cowardice. Or employment, Wolfe said. Very well. He didn't rise. He doesn't rise for pageants. He arranged his features to the proper severity and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, my office has occasionally hosted theatricals, but never to the detriment of food. You are here because an affront has been offered to the house of Rustermans and to my own, by means of an adulterated truffle and a counterfeit in ritual. The affront is not merely to appetite, it is to standards. Mr. Goodwin has invited you because each of you holds a thread. Tonight I tug. If I pull firmly enough, the garment will either come off or mend. Dax smiled at the word garment. Madame Pike produced a notebook and then, remembering, concealed it in her bag as if she had only been checking for a mirror. Klein nodded once, terse as a cork. Bellini tried to sit on his hands and failed. Paolo stared at his knees like they were the minutes left of his life. Wolfe inclined his head toward me. Proceed. I lifted the cloche. The room received a delicately amplified sigh. Even Dax's cologne sat up and took notice. Fritz had shaved truth thin enough to float. Madame Pike's eyes widened in a way that would have been art if it hadn't been industry. Bellini looked like a man watching his child recite. Klein's nostrils flared with the professional restraint of a man who does everything else for a living. Paolo stayed pale. That, Wolfe said, is an anchoring reference. Mr. Klein, you may smell. Do not touch. Madame Pike, Mr. Dax, likewise. Mr. Bellini will not faint. They made a slow procession of noses with pretensions, and even the columnist was reverent. For a woman who deals in words, scent is a language she knows to whisper in. When they had circled back to their chairs, Wolfe's eyes went to the desk corner, our salted place. He had an audience and his house arranged for burglary. He is greedy about the right satisfactions. Before we discuss how that odor is absent in part from a larger object, he said, I require one man who is not here. Mr. Goodwin? I stepped into the hall through the vestibule and opened the front door on a hinge that had been introduced to onion skin this morning. The skin was gone. The hair across the inner knob lay in two pieces on the rug like a correspondent who had split his infinitive. On the threshold, aligned too neatly for the wind, sat a matchbook from the cask. On its inside flap, in the kind of pencil that resents paper, 3 letters scuffed the surface, COS. Our guest had attended without attending. I closed the door and carried the matchbook back into the room. Nobody moved. Dax's eyebrows had inched upward as if he appreciated theater more than he had admitted. Madame Pike didn't reach for her bag. Klein looked at the matchbook like it might be corked. Bellini whispered a prayer in Italian under his breath. Paolo swallowed audibly. Wolfe regarded the little rectangle as if it were the Rosetta Stone. Mr. Goodwin, he said, put it with the wrong wax. Mr. Klein, will you be so good as to tell me whether paraffin lives in the same universe as Alba? Klein allowed himself a mortal smile. Only in a factory. Quite, Wolfe said. Then we are done making odors behave. Now let us make men do the same. He settled a fraction deeper in his chair, which is to say the room was about to tilt toward judgment. Someone brought the wrong substance into my house twice and the right stamp into the wrong room once. Someone sent blue roses and pretended to be generous. Someone had a stamp head made yesterday and a finger that smelled of cheap pine. Mr. Goodwin will fetch Mr. Coates if he can be fetched. If not, we will proceed with a different volunteer. He didn't have to say who. Paolo's hands tightened on the chair arms and then, to his credit, released. He met Wolfe's gaze like a boy who doesn't want to disappoint a teacher he's scared of and likes. Sir, he said before I could move, I did not take the truffle, but I know who would know who did. Wolfe's lip twitched. Would, he said, very soft. Proceed. Paolo's words hung in the air like smoke that didn't know where to settle. Wolfe didn't move. which was how you knew something inside him had. His eyes, heavy-lidded and ancient as a cathedral door, found the boy's face and pinned it there. The rest of us waited. Even Madame Pike, who could turn a whisper into a headline, had her pencil halfway to the page and didn't dare scratch. Paolo's throat worked twice before he managed another syllable. "I didn't take it," he said again, softer. "But the man who did. He's afraid. He thought he was just helping someone who loved the smell of truffles. Not stealing. He said it was only for a test, a little piece to compare." "Who is he?" Wolfe asked, not raising his voice. Paolo swallowed. "Cosmo. A mechanic. Works out of a garage on 11th. He fixes scooters and mopeds for the delivery boys. He said a man paid him to take something small from the box after it left the restaurant. He didn't want to know names. He said he'd be tipped if he made it look untouched." Bellini let out a hiss between his teeth. "Madonna," he muttered. "This is madness. A mechanic." "Silence," Wolfe said, and Bellini's jaw clicked shut. "Mr. Goodwin," he continued, "you've met Cosmo's reputation. Would you verify his flesh?" "Gladly," I said, and rose. "If he's in his garage, we'll know before his next lug nut." "Bring him back," Wolfe said. "If he resists, inform him I already have what he thinks he's hidden. If he's reasonable, he'll want to correct his own mistake before the wrong man burns for it." Madame Pike's eyes were bright with curiosity, barely leashed by discretion. "My dear Mr. Wolfe," she began, "if you intend to—" "I intend to solve a problem," Wolfe cut in, "not to entertain columnists. You will remain." That shut her down nicely. I got my coat, gave Saul a quick call to say we might need a net at 11th, and didn't bother to hang up properly. Fritz followed me to the door with his mouth tight enough to bottle air. "Be careful," he said. I told him I'd only be bringing back trouble that couldn't cook. The night had settled into that soft Manhattan gray that smells like money and exhaust. The Casks' neighborhood wasn't far. The garage Paolo meant was a narrow cavern between two tenements, the kind that looked like it should be selling spare sins instead of spare parts. The iron shutter was half up, and under its jaw a cone of yellow light showed a pair of greasy boots and the lower half of a man, wiping his hands on a rag that had already lost the argument. "Cosmo?" I said. He glanced up. The scar under his left eye caught the light like punctuation. "You're early," he said, like he'd been expecting someone else. "Depends who you were expecting," I said. "Maybe the man who wanted to borrow your pig." That got him. The rag froze. His jaw twitched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "That's what everyone says before Wolfe gets involved," I said. "But you're lucky. It's me tonight. I just need a conversation. You give me 5 minutes and we both get to keep our evening pleasant." He hesitated, then nodded toward a stool beside the workbench. "I didn't steal nothing," he said. "They just wanted to compare the smell. Said it was for an experiment, a fancy restaurant thing." "Which restaurant?" I asked. "I don't know," he said too fast. "Sure," I said. "And I'm the Pope's chauffeur." "Start from the beginning." He exhaled, smelling of oil and guilt. "A week ago, a guy came by, well-dressed, grey hair, little mustache, like he'd drawn it on with a ruler. Said his name was Klein. Offered me $50 if I could make a wax duplicate from a sample he'd bring. Couple days later, he shows with a napkin and a metal disc with a bore on it. Said he needed a copy to test a new sealing press for a private order. I did it, brass head, cheap handle. He said fine. Then a younger guy came, a waiter maybe, and told me to meet him at the side door of Rusterman's on delivery day. I just had to open the courier's case, take a sliver off the truffle, seal it again, and walk away. He said no one would know, said it was for chemical testing. "Chemical testing?" I repeated. "And you believe that?" He looked at his hands. I didn't believe it, but I believed I needed the money. I could have told him that's the line that writes most confessions, but Wolfe prefers his lessons first-hand. I phoned Fritz to prepare the office for another guest and signaled Saul, who was conveniently leaning against the wall across the street pretending to study a lamppost. We bundled Cosmo into a cab without ceremony. He didn't argue. His shoulders sagged like he'd already rehearsed the end. When we got back, the office had that charged silence that means Wolfe's patience is on a timer. Everyone was still there, even Dax, who looked insulted by the passage of time. Madame Pike had her notebook out again, open but untouched. Klein sat stiffly, his lips pressed so thin they could have been an underline. Paolo was white as plaster. I led Cosmo in. He stopped halfway and blinked, the way people do when they realize they've walked into a courtroom instead of a room. Wolfe inclined his head. "Good evening," he said. "Sit." Cosmo sat. The chair creaked in protest. "Your name?" Wolfe asked. "Cosmo Leary." "You are a mechanic?" "Yes, sir." "You have lately expanded your trade to engraving." Cosmo's eyes widened. "How? Never mind how," Wolfe said. "You made a copy of a seal for Mr. Klein." The sommelier's head jerked up. "That's a lie." Wolfe raised a hand. "Not yet, sir. We'll determine its truth before you waste it. Mr. Leary?" Cosmo's glance darted around the room, found no refuge, and landed on Paolo. "I didn't mean any harm," he said. The man said it was harmless. He gave me the wax and the stamp. He said to test the impression for clarity and return it. He said to take a bit from the Truffle for scientific assessment. He said I'd be paid through the boy. Paolo looked ready to vanish. "He didn't tell me that," he burst out. "He just said deliver quick, that's all." Wolfe's eyes slid to Klein. "Mr. Klein?" The sommelier's composure cracked like overbaked sugar. "This is absurd. Yes, I ordered a duplicate, but not for theft, for protection. I feared the original seal might be compromised after last season's fraud attempts. I wanted a backup." "Of course," Wolfe said, "and it was coincidence that you hired a mechanic through an intermediary and told him to extract a sample from the Truffle under false pretenses." Klein flushed darkly. "I never—" Dax laughed, sharp and soft. "Ah, cher monsieur, perhaps you only wished to scent it, to test your nose." "Enough," Wolfe said. "Mr. Klein, you have the arrogance of the scrupulous. You feared Gauthier's carelessness would taint your cellar's reputation. You imagined that by sampling the Truffle and analyzing its bouquet, you could confirm its authenticity before the dinner. You enlisted this unfortunate simpleton to do what you dared not. But when the Truffle reached me, I smelled petroleum, not authenticity. You, sir, introduced that taint. The solvent came from your safe maintenance, your paraffin habit. You opened the vault after Gauthier sealed the box. You touched the wax, found it sticky, and thought to reinforce it. You contaminated the rice bed when you reassembled your crime." Klein had gone still, his fingers working invisibly against his palms. "That's preposterous," he whispered. "It's logical," Wolfe said. "You ordered the duplicate to conceal your curiosity. When the sample went missing, you panicked, bribed the boy to silence, and sent blue roses through Mr. Dax to distract me with flourish. You intended to retrieve the faulty wax scrap from my desk tonight to destroy the evidence of your experiment gone awry." Madame Pike made a small, delighted sound before catching herself. Bellini exhaled the prayer backward this time. Dax's smirk froze halfway through self-congratulation. Klein surged to his feet. "You can't prove—" "I can," Wolfe said, "by smell. The card from the roses carries your own cologne's base note, altered with Dax's lab compound to imitate his signature. You meant to implicate him if the trick were discovered. My nose distinguishes them as easily as a bell from a drum." Fritz, standing silently behind Wolfe, lifted the cloche and set the real Truffle beside its box. Wolfe pointed with emotion as delicate as a sentence ending. "The remaining 17 ounces are uncorrupted," he said. "The missing 2 were burned in curiosity and arrogance. You will return to Rustermann's, Confess your act to Mr. Gauthier and ensure he informs no one else. I shall supervise. If you do not—" His gaze sharpened, a surgeon's edge behind the calm. "I will invite the police to learn how wine and wax become accomplices." Klein's lips moved once, twice. Then he sat, head lowered. "You would ruin me," he said hoarsely. "No," Wolfe said. "I will educate you. Ruin is optional." Silence held for a long breath. Then Wolfe turned to Dax and Madame Pike. "Mr. Dax, you will write no fragrance inspired by this affair. Madame, you may print a single line, that Rusterman's Truffle dinner will proceed under the supervision of Nero Wolfe. No embellishment." "I'm heartbroken," she said, already composing headlines in her mind. "I doubt it," Wolfe said. "Archie, see them out." I did, one by one. Klein last, still pale and folding in on himself like paper that's seen fire. When the door closed, I came back to find Wolfe alone, eyes half shut, lips set in that shape they take when a conclusion has settled exactly where he wanted it. "Well," I said, "we've preserved the honor of fungi everywhere." He didn't smile. "We have preserved order," he said. "Fungus was merely the occasion." "Still," I said, "you have to admit it was quite a feast for the nose." He reached for his bear. "Archie," he said, "in a world where men defile perfection for curiosity, the sense of smell is the last reliable witness. Tonight, it testified." He drank, and the brownstone exhaled, calm returning like warmth to a cool dish. Fritz cleared the cloche and straightened the tray. Outside, the city rumbled its indifferent applause. When Wolfe finally rose to go upstairs, he said over his shoulder, "Remind Mr. Gauthier the truffle is intact, and tell him next time to ensure not the ingredient, but the men." "Sure," I said. "I'll put that in the policy, under moral hazards." He vanished up the stairs without answering, which was as close to laughter as he ever got. Cosmo's confession didn't end the evening. It only opened another chamber of it. Wolfe had dismissed the rest once Klein's collapse reached its quietest dignity, leaving only Fritz, Saul, who'd slipped in from the street without ceremony, and me. The house had gone heavy again, full of that particular stillness it gets when Wolfe isn't merely satisfied, but irritated that satisfaction came too easily. He sat with his fingers steepled, eyes half closed, listening to the echo of his own reasoning. I've seen that look before. It's what happens when a small crime turns out to have left a larger footprint than the criminal realized. He wasn't admiring his triumph. He was scenting unfinished business. "You're not convinced," I said. "I'm convinced of Klein's folly," Wolfe said, "but not of its origin. The blue roses, the duplications, the trespass in this office. Those are excesses of cunning, not panic. Klein is vain, not clever." Saul, leaning against the archway, rubbed a thumb over his chin. "You think someone played him?" "I think someone used his fear the way a bow uses a string," Wolfe murmured. "Archie, what did you make of the blue roses?" "Artificial," I said. "Dyed deep, expensive stems, delivered twice with Dax's scent faked and Klein's penmanship. That's not improvisation, it's stagecraft. Somebody wanted to point both you and Gauthier in the wrong direction while the theft was being cleaned up." Wolfe nodded slightly. "Exactly. Klein's tampering explains the contamination, but not the artistry. No man of his temperament risks an anonymous prank to distract me. He would have sent apologies wrapped in Latin. There is another hand." I glanced at Saul. "Cosmo's well-dressed man with a ruler mustache doesn't fit anyone we know, unless Dax moonlights in disguise." Saul grinned faintly. "I followed up on that while you were taming the mechanic. The engraving shop's ledger had a note. Urgent duplicate. Ordered by phone. Prepaid courier pickup. The call came from a number registered to a company called Aromatis Industries." "Dax's company." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Of course, perfume and deception share a workshop. Mr. Dax wished to test a blend, perhaps to create an essence of Alba that could be sold at $1,000 an ounce to fools who wish to smell rich. But to synthesize authenticity, he required comparison. Which means, I said, he paid Klein to find him a sample. Klein thought he was guarding Rusterman's reputation, not renting it. Dax gets his stolen truffle sliver for scent experiments. Klein gets to sleep believing he's noble, and Cosmo gets $50 in guilt. Wolfe's eyes half closed again. And I, he said, receive blue roses as a professional insult. The scent was his signature challenge. Pfui. He leaned back, the leather sighing under his weight. It was not merely theft. It was mockery. Mockery's one thing, Saul said, but proof's another. You want him to eat his own perfume or just sign a confession? I want him to understand, Wolfe said. Men who counterfeit smell are worse than liars. They are metaphysicians of deceit. Archie, tomorrow you will call on Mr. Dax. You will tell him that Rusterman's intends to announce a forensic analysis of the adulterated truffle, comparing chemical residues to a proprietary base used in certain perfume houses. If his conscience is secure, he may attend. Translation: he'll sweat before breakfast. Precisely, Wolfe said. Saul, you will obtain a vial of his latest product, Nocturne de Provence, I believe. Bring it to me before noon. Saul nodded and slipped out with the quiet of competence. Fritz collected the trays and glasses, moving as if afraid to disturb the ideas hovering over Wolfe's head. When the house emptied again, I stayed, because habit told me Wolfe wasn't finished. He kept staring at the desk where the wrong wax still glistened faintly, untouched since Cosmo's entrance. Archie, he said finally, do you recall the first time we dined at Rusterman's after assuming partial ownership? Sure, I said. You spent the evening dissecting the moral character of the waiter because he tilted the bottleneck toward himself while pouring Burgundy. Indeed, Wolfe said. I abhor corruption of ritual. A truffle, a seal, a scent. They are ceremonies, not commodities. Mr. Dax believes otherwise. He looked at me then, and the weight in his gaze was the same weight he reserves for human folly. We will disabuse him. He rose, a rare event, and made for the stairs. That was my cue. The evening was adjourned. The next morning was pale and clean, with the kind of sunlight that flatters no one. Fritz was in high form, feeding me eggs so perfect they could have signed autographs, while Wolfe did his usual pre-orchid sulk with coffee. When I finished, he handed me an envelope thick with notes, his polite version of a subpoena. At 11, he said, "You will deliver this to Mr. Dax personally. Not to his secretary, his valet, or any decorative obstruction. To him. If he declines to receive it, read it aloud." Public humiliation, I said. That's a little continental. Appropriate, Wolfe said. The letter asserts that my office intends to submit the contaminated truffle for chemical analysis, and that should synthetic aroma compounds be identified, the relevant parties will be named in open correspondence to the press. That'll get his attention, I said. And if he calls your bluff? I do not bluff, Wolfe said. I delegate. So I did my errand. Dax's headquarters was a temple to indulgence, marble lobby, gold script on the doors, and an elevator that smelled like it was auditioning for its own fragrance. His assistant tried to intercept me with the smile of someone paid to keep disasters decorative, but I overrode it with a line about Nero Wolfe's personal signature and the phrase, pending disclosure. That got me ushered in. Dax was behind a desk large enough to dock a yacht. He looked groomed, but the confidence had a chip in it, the kind of polish you see on a man who knows a spot he can't reach. I gave him the envelope. He broke the seal, scanned the letter, and gave a short laugh that was more carbon than melody. "My dear Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I'm flattered that Mr. Wolfe believes my nose reaches so far as to perfume his investigations. But you cannot frighten me with chemistry. I wasn't trying to, I said, but I'm told it works better than cologne on your conscience. His eyes cooled. Be careful. I employ men who take offense for a living. I employ one who takes results, I said. The difference is efficiency. You have until 5 to respond. If you don't, Wolfe will have a word with Rusterman's investors about counterfeit essence being tested on their property. That landed. His hand tightened on the letter until the paper creaked. You're bluffing, he said. Tell yourself that till dinner, I said, and walked out. Back at the brownstone, Saul was waiting with a small dark bottle. The label read Nocturne de Provence. Wolfe sniffed once, eyes half closed, and nodded. The same aldehyde balance as the card. Insolent. At 5 on the dot, the doorbell rang. Fritz announced Dax with a tone that could curdle perfume. Dax entered in a storm cloud of self-control and shut the door himself. You've overstepped, he said without preamble. This letter, this accusation, it's slander. Not if true, Wolfe said mildly. Sit. I'll stand. Then you will fatigue yourself while I speak. You tampered with Rusterman's Truffle through intermediaries, intending to capture its scent for synthesis. You employed Mr. Klein's scruples and Mr. Leary's tools, concealed by charm and vanity. You failed because you underestimated both the Truffle and me. Dax's nostrils flared. You can't prove I touched anything. I don't need to. Proof lies in consequence. The synthetic base of your Nocturne de Provence contains the same trace paraffin molecule that infected the Truffle. Mr. Klein's solvent contamination was your product's residue. When he handled the sample you had him steal, he left your perfume behind. For a second, Dax looked genuinely bewildered, as if the truth had slapped him before he recognized it. Then his shoulders dropped. You have no sample. I have your bottle, Wolfe said, and I have the Truffle. If I must, I will let a chemist prove their kinship. I prefer discretion. You will provide restitution to Rustermans, a written confession to absolve Klein, and the remainder of your so-called essence for destruction. You will also remove my name from your mouth permanently. Dax drew a long breath. Or I ruin you, Wolfe said simply, and I do not enjoy repetition. Something in the tone convinced him faster than logic could. He sat down after all, staring at the carpet like it had just revealed an escape clause. Very well, he said. I'll sign. Wolfe gestured to me. Archie, type it, briefly. 10 minutes later, Dax signed a statement that would make any lawyer weep, admitting unauthorized experimental interference and misuse of culinary materials for olfactory purposes. Fritz took it away like an offering. When the door closed behind Dax, Wolfe exhaled through his nose, long and slow. A pity, he said. His sense of smell was exquisite. His ethics were synthetic. You've got your confession, I said. Rusterman's gets its dinner, Klein gets his dignity, and Fritz gets his fennel back. Anything missing? Yes, Wolfe said. Peace. He lifted the glass Fritz had placed beside him, looked into the amber, and murmured almost to himself, Curiosity in men is admirable until it forgets to be decent. Then he drank, leaned back, and shut his eyes. For once, I didn't quip. The brownstone had earned its silence. Outside, the city's noise was muffled like a lid fitted to a pot. Somewhere beyond it, 1,000 people were chasing scents of their own, money, fame, temptation. But inside, we had one Truffle, unspoiled, and a man who'd restored order the only way he knew, by thinking until the world confessed. I thought the story had packed itself neatly into one of Wolfe's mental filing drawers. Crime confessed, Truffle restored, world back in order. But if there's one thing I should have learned by now, it's that Wolfe's sense of completion is about as permanent as a New York parking spot. The next morning, he wasn't content. He was irritated. The kind of irritation that makes Fritz serve breakfast like a man delivering a ceasefire. Wolfe didn't touch the eggs. He stared at them as if they'd wronged him philosophically. When he finally spoke, it wasn't about Klein or Dax. It was about something far less edible. "Archie," he said, "who delivered Dax's confession to Rustamans?" "Fritz," I said. "As instructed. He gave it to Gauthier at 9:30, and Gauthier sent back a telegram of gratitude so perfumed it could have been bottled." "Did Gauthier mention the truffle?" Wolfe asked. "Only that it was shaved, served, and applauded. Apparently, a senator almost cried." Wolfe made a noise that wasn't quite approval. "Then we should be at peace," he said. "But I'm not." "Maybe you missed the excitement," I suggested. "You've been deprived of the usual homicide quota." He gave me a glance that could have frozen carbon. "Something lingers. Klein was a fool, Dax a scoundrel, but neither sent blue roses twice, and neither could have known the precise hour Fritz would be in the kitchen. That second delivery implies surveillance, and surveillance implies more than curiosity." I leaned back. "You think somebody else was watching us?" "I'm certain," Wolfe said. "Whoever arranged those deliveries knew my habits with more precision than is comfortable. I do not enjoy being studied." That got my attention. When Wolfe admits to discomfort, it's like the Statue of Liberty complaining about the wind. "You want me to shake the florist?" "No, he's an innocent intermediary. You will start with Dax's environment. Aromat's Industries employs chemists, salesmen, and couriers. One of them, possibly dismissed, possibly still employed, acted as his arm in the operation. Find him. And if he's gone, then he left tracks. Every man who enters Wolfe's orbit leaves tracks." That was my marching order. By noon, I was standing in the sterile corridors of Aromat's Industries, breathing air that smelled faintly of ambition. The receptionist had cheekbones that could have been patented. She smiled, just wide enough to discourage repetition. "I'd like to see whoever handles experimental logistics," I said. "I'm from Rustamans. Follow up on a shipment cross-reference." She blinked once, corporate for suspicion, but rang a number anyway. 10 minutes later, I was shaking hands with a man who looked like a nervous accountant crossbred with a chemist. His badge said Kendall Reese, Distribution Oversight. His tie said he wished he'd called in sick. "Shipment cross-reference?" he said. "I don't— yes, the culinary samples. Mr. Dax mentioned something. You're from Rusterman's?" "That's right," I said easily. "I'm checking records on a small extract sent out last week. Something to do with olfactory calibration." Reese's mouth twitched. "We don't normally supply to restaurants directly, only through licensed fragrance liaisons. But Mr. Dax had special permissions." "Special how?" He hesitated, then shrugged the way men do when they think truth is cheaper than lying. He commissioned a limited series of comparative samples, synthetic mimicry of organic scents. One was the tuber magnatum base, the white truffle profile. He claimed it was for education, but he insisted on personal delivery. "Did he deliver them himself?" Reese shook his head. "No, he used one of our couriers, a temporary hire. We bring on freelancers when we need discretion." "Name?" I asked. He frowned, trying to recall. The file said something odd. "C. Leary. No relation to your mechanic, I presume." That stopped me cold. "Describe him." "Medium height, scar under the eye, always chewing his lip." Cosmo again. Only now he wasn't working alone. I left Reese blinking at empty air and made straight for the cab stand. My head was running laps. If Dax had hired Cosmo first as a courier for the scent samples, then used him later as the go-between for Klein's theft, the timeline flipped on its head. Cosmo wasn't just a pawn. He was the link between both worlds, and that meant somebody else might still be holding one of Dax's original vials. By the time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe had installed himself behind the desk like a judge awaiting an appeal. Fritz hovered nearby, polishing invisible dust off the beer tray. "Well?" Wolfe asked. Cosmo again, I said. Turns out our mechanic moonlighted for Dax before the Truffle affair. Delivered test vials labeled tuber magnatum essence, probably the same base he used for that nocturne line. Dax didn't run the errand himself. He subcontracted Curiosity. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Then Dax lied. Surprise of the century, I said. But there's more. Those vials. There were 6 made. 1 stayed at Aromatis. The others were delivered to Dax's personal chemist, a freelance perfumer named Lyra Quinn. Female, Wolfe asked. Judging by the pronoun, yes. He tapped the edge of his blotter. Find her. It took 2 hours and a call to Saul before we tracked her to a loft off Houston above a bakery that smelled of sugar and danger. Lyra Quinn opened the door herself. A woman in her 30s with steady hands, a lab apron, and eyes that assessed you as quickly as she did compounds. You're not from the press, she said. Not yet, I told her. We're here about Mr. Dax's little olfactory side project, the truffle extract. She exhaled, set down a glass vial on her workbench, and turned. He told me it was legal, she said quietly. A comparative study for marketing. Then I saw the lab note, sample from original Alba specimen. I knew that couldn't be right. No restaurant would sell that, not even to him. You kept the residue? I asked. She nodded and held up the vial. The label read, Base Compound, Tuber Prototype Number 3. The liquid inside was clear with a faint golden tint. Smell it, she said. I did, carefully. It was truffle, but sterile, thin, with a ghost of something metallic underneath. Not petroleum, something sharper, more deliberate. Chromatone, she said. A fixative used in fine scents. Keeps molecules stable. It's banned in food research. It binds organic compounds too strongly. If any trace of this touched the real truffle, it would smell like corruption, I finished. She nodded. I told him it was unstable. He laughed and said he only needed to fool one nose. Wolfe's nose, apparently. I thanked her, took the vial, and left her looking both relieved and terrified. By the time we returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with the sort of calm that means trouble for someone else. I set the vial on his desk. He examined it without touching, just breathing near it. His nostrils twitched once. Chromatone, he murmured. How very stupid. So Dax didn't just steal a scent, I said. He poisoned his own sample. Worse, Wolfe said. He created evidence that now binds him to every contaminated aroma in the truffle's lineage. If Rusterman's patrons fell ill, or even complained, he could be charged with adulteration under federal code. I grinned. That's leverage. Wolfe inclined his head. Precisely. We shall employ it, tactfully. But tact wasn't in the cards. At 7, the phone rang. Fritz answered, frowned, and passed the receiver to Wolfe. Mr. Wolfe, a voice crackled. It was Gauthier's, tight and shaken. You must come, or send Mr. Goodwin. A man collapsed in the kitchen during service. Poison, we think. There's talk of tainted oil, but the scent, it's truffle. I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed my coat. Wolfe's voice followed me, low and even. Observe everything, touch nothing, and Archie, do not let them move the body until I have smelt it. If that sounds macabre, you've never watched Wolfe turn death into deduction. By the time I reached Rusterman's, the dining room was shuttered and the air heavy with panic and something darker. Gauthier met me at the door, pale and sweating. My sous-chef, Leroux, he stammered. He tasted the sample sauce before plating. 5 minutes later, he was on the floor. Dead. Not yet, but close. I followed him through the kitchen to a corner near the prep station. The smell hit first, rich, earthy, and wrong. Truffle, yes, but with that same metallic tang I'd inhaled from Lyra's vial. Only this time, it wasn't contained in glass. It was in the air, mingled with fear and sweat. "Where's the sauce?" I asked. He pointed to a copper pan still on the counter, half full. I leaned in. The surface shimmered faintly, slick and pale. The aroma was unmistakable. Chromatone. I stood there, staring at it, the truth sliding together like tumblers in a lock. Someone had used Dax's synthetic compound again. But this time, not for perfume. This was deliberate. This was murder in rehearsal. And somewhere, beneath the clatter of panic and the hum of refrigeration, I could already hear Wolfe's voice in my head. "Phooey, Archie. They have turned aroma into weaponry." The scene at Rusterman's kitchen was organized chaos, the kind that trembles on the edge of hysteria, but never quite jumps. The staff had been herded to one side. Their faces were a study in varying shades of disbelief. The copper pans gleamed, the tiles glared, and at the center of it all lay Leroux, the sous chef, pale as marble and breathing in short, uneven pulls. A paramedic knelt beside him, doing all the things they do when death is in the room but hasn't decided whether to stay. I crouched beside the copper pan, careful not to disturb the puddle of sauce that had already condemned the air. The smell was sharp and elegant, the ghost of truffle laced with something metallic and cold, a chemical sneer under the perfume of fine food. It was unmistakable now that I'd smelled the sauce at Lara Quinn's loft. Chromatone. "Who made this sauce?" I asked. Gauthier looked ready to collapse himself. "Leroux," he whispered, "for the amuse-bouche. A truffle emulsion with duck fat. He said he was testing an infusion oil a supplier had sent, something to extend the aroma." "Supplier?" He pointed at a small glass bottle sitting by the spice rack. It was elegant and unmarked, with a silver cap and a faint residue of gold on the label. Something meant to look exclusive. I picked it up by the neck and held it to the light. Inside, what remained was viscous and faintly iridescent, the way fine oil shouldn't be. I uncorked it and took the briefest whiff. The same synthetic truffle base, only stronger, weaponized. Gauthier saw my face and made a sound like a prayer torn in half. "Mon Dieu, who would—" "Don't ask me," I said. "Ask your records. Who delivered this?" He swallowed. "A courier, late afternoon. Said it was an express sample from Mr. Dax's firm, part of a new collaboration." Of course it was. I straightened, turned to the paramedic. "How bad?" "He's alive," the medic said without looking up. "Barely. Whatever this was, it hit his nervous system fast. We've flushed the stomach. He might pull through if the compound wasn't corrosive." "Get him to Bellevue," I said. "And keep the bottle. Tell the ER doctor to look for synthetic aromatic compounds, not toxins, and for God's sake don't wash that pan." Gauthier nodded frantically. "Will he live?" "I don't know," I said, "but if he does, he'll remember who gave him the bottle, and that's one conversation Wolfe will want to attend personally." I called Fritz from the payphone near the coat room and told him to put Wolfe on. When Wolfe's voice came through, it was calm, low, and heavier than gravity. "Report. Leroux, poisoned. Synthetic truffle oil delivered this afternoon. Same compound Lara Quinn showed us. Courier claimed it was from Dax's firm." "Claimed?" Wolfe said. "Unverified. But it had his mark. The packaging, the logo impression, and the scent is his. Only this time someone increased the concentration. If I had to guess, it was intended to be lethal in contact with heat." He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, the tone had changed, deeper, colder. "That is not Dax's signature. Vanity? Yes. Murder? No. Someone else has taken his instruments." "You think someone's using his name?" "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that we have entered a new orbit. Bring me the bottle, and see that the kitchen remains untouched. Fritz will prepare the testing equipment. Mr. Panzer will meet you outside in 10 minutes." By the time Saul and I reached the brownstone, Fritz had transformed the office into a temporary laboratory. The bottle went under glass. Wolfe was already seated, his expression carved from basalt. He didn't greet me, only gestured toward the decanter. "Describe the odor." "Metallic undertone," I said. "Truffle note amplified, not extracted. It bites instead of blooms." He nodded. "Artificial exaggeration, a perfumer's vanity turned malicious. The compound has been altered. Someone extracted chromatone from Dax's base and catalyzed it with phenylacetate, a volatile ester used in industrial scent stabilization. Heated, it releases nerve agents in microdoses. The chef was lucky." "Lucky," I said. "He's half dead." "Alive," Wolfe corrected. "Had the dish been served, the vapor would have settled over 6 plates. Half the dining room might have collapsed before dessert." That hung in the air a long time. Then I asked the obvious. Who benefits from murdering Rusterman's customers with fake truffle oil? "Who indeed?" Wolfe murmured. "Dax would not risk exposure. His vanity depends on admiration, not ruin. Klein lacks the temperament. Our chemist, Miss Quinn, feared contamination. She would destroy, not deploy. Which leaves Cosmo," I said. "A messenger, not an author," Wolfe finished. "He lacks motive and imagination, but he had access. He delivered both the wax seal and the vial. Someone used him again." Saul leaned against the cabinet, thoughtful. "I could nose around the courier circuit," he said. "If this bottle was routed through a freelance network, somebody logged the delivery. Even poison gets a paper trail." "Do so?" Wolfe said. "And quietly. The police must not interfere until we have the route. This is not merely assault, it is a demonstration. Someone has repurposed scent as proof of superiority." That was Wolfe's polite way of saying, "A man who wants me to know he exists." Fritz entered then, holding a telegram envelope. "For you, sir. Just arrived." Wolfe opened it, read, and let out a low, disgusted sound. "It seems the demonstration continues. A second bottle has been delivered, this time to the French embassy for their reception tonight, labeled as a gift from Nero Wolfe." I whistled. "They're framing you with your own nose." "Pooh," Wolfe said. "A childish stratagem, but an inconvenient one." He pushed back from the desk, the leather sighing in protest. "Archie, we will intercept it. You and Mr. Panzer will go to the embassy. Present this letter of introduction. Fritz, type it. Inform the ambassador that his gift is a fraud and that opening it will be catastrophic. Retrieve it intact. If the impostor appears, detain him. Use discretion if possible. Force if not." I gave him a salute that wasn't entirely unserious. "And if the ambassador doesn't believe me?" "Tell him the perfume will make his guests sleep in their soup," Wolfe said. "He will believe that." Saul and I made it to the embassy just past 8. The reception was already in bloom. Diplomats, chandeliers, and champagne-like laughter with an accent. We were intercepted by a security aide who looked too young to be that suspicious. The letter did its work, though, and within minutes we were escorted to the preparation area. There it sat. A bottle identical to the one from Rusterman's. Silver cap gleaming, label embossed, "Gift from Nero Wolfe," with compliments. Saul whistled low. "That's either a compliment or a declaration of war." I examined the seal. It was genuine wax, the crowned boar insignia from Rusterman's, but pressed with Wolfe's personal stamp, his monogram in gold relief. No one had access to that but me, Fritz, or Wolfe himself. My stomach tightened. "Someone's been in the house again," I said quietly. Saul's eyes flicked up, and they're fast. We left with the bottle wrapped and sealed in the same protective case Fritz had packed. The ambassador never even saw it. On the drive back, the air in the cab was thick with the unsaid. Wolfe had been targeted directly now, not just his name, but his private seal. Whoever had orchestrated this wasn't finished. They were escalating. When we returned, Wolfe was waiting in the office, motionless except for the twitch of one finger against the armrest. I placed the case before him. We got it. He looked at the bottle a long moment, then at me. They used my seal, my wax, my scent. That, he said softly, is intimate trespass. Meaning? I asked. Meaning, he said. The thief is not outside. He has been in this house. That was when Fritz came back from the kitchen, holding a folded slip of paper. Mr. Wolfe, he said tightly. This was on the pantry door. Wolfe took it, unfolded it, and read aloud in a voice that seemed too quiet for the words. For a man who worships the purity of aroma, you should know, corruption begins at home. There was no signature, just a faint, oily smear that smelled unmistakably of chromatone. The silence after that was total. Then Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and spoke to no one in particular. Archie, he said, we have been invited to war. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe take an insult personally, you've missed the quietest weather shift in New York. The note with its smear of synthetic rot lay on his desk like a dead insect you didn't swat yourself. Fritz had the expression he keeps for ruined stock. Saul's mouth went thin enough to thread a needle. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The room had already leaned his way. Archie, he said, we will answer that line. Corruption begins at home, by beginning at ours. Every ingress, every errand, every delivery of the last 48 hours goes on the board. Then we will move outward. I started the list aloud because sometimes the sound helps. Blue roses, twice. The florist's boy at 4:15 and again the next day at noon. The pantry note, the embassy bottle, the earlier trespass, the wax smear on your blotter, the matchbook COS at the door, the sealed Rusterman's box comparison in this room, and a courier who got into the kitchen long enough to hang a nasty valentine on Fritz's door. Fritz lifted his chin. He did not come through my kitchen while I was in it. Then he came when you weren't, I said, wanting to pat his sleeve and deciding I like my fingers. Which means he watched you until you weren't. Saul pushed off the jam. I'll start with Corman, he said. If someone duplicated Wolfe's monogram, he either did it or knows who did. Engravers talk. Their bins talk louder. Go, Wolfe said. Archie, the florist. On it. I pocketed the pantry note in a glassine envelope, picked up the embassy bottle case, and headed for Madison. The florists had the kind of tasteful facade that makes you feel underdressed if your wallet's not in evening wear. The owner himself came forward when I asked for the delivery ledger, a man whose boutonniere was smarter than most people I know. He resisted until I showed Wolfe's card and a copy of the embassy letter with counterfeit gift underlined like a sermon. That got me a ledger and a wince. 2 orders, both anonymous, both paid cash, both with instructions read off a typed slip that had been handed to the clerk by a courier in a cap. The slips were gone, filed in the circular cabinet, the way paper goes when men don't think people will die from it. But the ledger had something useful. The cash had been wrapped in a folded matchbook from the cask the first time and from a different bar the second. I asked to see their waste bin. The owner blinked and let me. It was optimistic, but hope pays low rent. No slips. Just a crumple of blue cellophane and the end of a ribbon smelling faintly of something clean and metallic. Our old friend, the fake virtue of chromatone. Back on 11th, the cask's barkeep saw me and sighed. He stiffed you too? Who? Cosmo, he said. He borrowed a $5 till the end of the world. The world ended and didn't tell me. Seen him since, last night. Came in flushed, left quick when a suit parked in the corner stared too long. Suit with a face like it had been measured before it was assembled. That one gave off, what is it? Office. He squinted. He smelled like air conditioning and printer toner. Company man, I said. He follow Cosmo? Close, the barkeep said. Not too close. I left him richer by a tip and poorer by a matchbook. mine this time to keep the pattern honest, and called Saul. He picked up on the second ring and didn't let me finish. Corman's bin coughed, he said. 2 heads, 1 crowned boar you know and hate, 1 monogram that looks a lot like Wolfe's, good brass, crisp, unmounted. Job was paid cash through a drop. No face, just an intermediary. Corman says the order came from art people. He means people who wear black and bring opinions. Perfume art? I said. Or marketing art, Saul said. He did remember a name, though. Package pickup was signed Reese. Kendall Reese. Aromatis Industries. Distribution oversight with a tie that wanted to be elsewhere. I grabbed a cab for Houston. Lara Quinn's door opened on the first knock. She looked like she hadn't slept. Guilt makes a rotten pillow. I laid it out. LaRue down, embassy stunt, the pantry note. When I said Reese, she blinked twice fast. He's not a chemist, she said. He's a handler. He's the kind who likes to stand next to clever. He came to my loft once with paperwork. Dax was too busy to sign. He asked a lot of questions. He liked to finger the vials. Did he take any? I asked. If he did, I would have noticed, she said, then hesitated. He did handle the transport case. He said he'd have couriers he trusted seal it. Quality control. If he swapped labels or duplicated seals, I wouldn't have seen. Would he know about chromatone's heat behavior? I asked. She stared at the floor, a breath too long. He'd know I warned them, she said. He read the memo where I put it in bold. Which gave us motive with a ribbon. A man with access and envy, elbow deep in logistics, who'd learned just enough science to be dangerous and just enough wolf to be theatrical. He could hire Cosmo for grubby work and wrap flowers like threats. He could time deliveries to Fritz's errands because he'd been in and out to help when Dax brought the first vial to the brownstone, or when Cosmo came with his cheap wax. That pantry note smelled of Reese the way a resume smells of ambition. Back home, Wolfe had the office at parade rest, the embassy bottle under glass, the pantry note beside it, Saul on the settee with a pad of names and arrows. Fritz hovered like a Swiss guardian angel with a tray of coffee that had decided to be brandy if asked twice. I reported. Wolfe listened, eyes down, weighing words by ounces. When I said, Reese, he did not move. When I said Corman's bin and the second head, his eyelids raised a notch and settled. Mr. Reese, he said, has the temperament of a curate and the aspirations of a vandal. A dangerous cross. He fed Mr. Dax the illusion that he was bold. He fed Mr. Klein the illusion he was prudent. And he feeds himself the illusion that I will not notice a thumb where it does not belong. He lifted his gaze to me. We will disabuse him. Office gathering? I asked. Tonight, he said. 8:30. Gauthier, Klein, Dax, Cosmo Leary, Miss Quinn, Mr. Reese. I will not invite the police. If anyone declines, inform him the French embassy will be apprised of the provenance of their nearly gift. Saul's pencil ticked off names. Reese won't come, he said. Men like that avoid rooms where the furniture is smarter than they are. He will, Wolfe said, and looked at the pantry note again as if it had offered him a line rewrite. He wants an audience. He has one. We split duties. Saul went to fish Cosmo from whatever drain he had poured himself into. I called Rustamans. Gauthier accepted in a rush, then tried to bring a cleaver and settled for his presence. Klein's voice had the chastened velvet of a man who's found the bottom and is now loyal to gravity. Dax paused long enough to decide whether attendance could be spun as magnanimity and then accepted because ego is punctual. Lara said she would come if it will stop this. Reese took the longest. He let my invitation sit in the line like a fly on water. When he finally came on, his tone was cordial with citric edges. Mr. Wolfe wishes to see me, he said, like a man reading an engraved card he hadn't asked for. Wishes is generous, I said. 8:30. Don't wear anything that cries when someone says adulteration. I'm not part of your kitchen melodrama, he said. No, I said. You're the part outside the kitchen. It's smaller than you think. 8:30. He debated the silence and lost. I'll attend, he said, and hung up, leaving a tone behind like a metal spoon on china. At 8:20, the brownstone wore its civility like armor. Fritz had arranged chairs with the precision of a choir master. The Truffle sat in its glass temple on the credenza behind Wolfe, not as evidence now, but as reminder of what the world should smell like when men behave. The embassy bottle and the pantry note lay on the desk corner where intruders like to prove they exist. My desk had the monogram head Saul had borrowed from Corman's bin, wrapped in muslin, waiting for a confession to fit it. They came in order of pride and fear. Klein first, hair disciplined, eyes steady for the first time since he had tried to be the conscience of a safe. Gauthier second, jaw set to war. Dax third, satin confidence over a frayed weave. Cosmo with Saul attached to his shoulder like a conscience with a billing rate. Lara Quinn with a small case and the look of a woman who has had enough of men who mistake possible for wise. And then Kendall Reese, who wore a suit that had learned to pass for authority and a face that wanted to be unremarkable so hard it had become a remark. Wolfe didn't rise. He did not need to. He arranged his hands as if they were a paragraph and let the room sit under him a moment to learn how that felt. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we have been occupied with fungi, fragrance, and foolishness. Tonight we add felony. Yesterday a man was nearly killed, and a roomful of guests nearly joined him, by a synthetic compound delivered in a bottle purporting to come from Mr. Dax's firm and lettered with my name. The compound was chromatone-based, catalyzed to release harm when heated. It was weaponized scent. He let the phrase stand, calm and obscene. I dislike ingenuity in the service of malice. Reese made a small, deprecating motion. Mr. Wolfe, I manage shipping. If there has been impropriety, it is a matter for legal departments. Legal departments are for the timid, Wolfe said. We will do with logic. He indicated the embassy bottle. That was delivered to the French embassy. The seal bears my monogram. Mr. Goodwin found its twin. He inclined his head toward the muslin-wrapped head on my blotter. In Mr. Corman's bin. Ordered cash, picked up by a man who signed Reese. Reese smiled. Not much. A common name. A distinct hand, Wolfe said, and turned to Lara. Miss Quinn, will you identify the fixative? She stepped forward, uncorked the embassy bottle, touched a glass rod to the rim, and held it to her nose. Her eyes flicked to Wolfe. Chromatone with phenylacetate. Concentrated. Thank you, Wolfe said. Mr. Dax, have you ever authorized the use of chromatone for culinary application? Dax managed to look offended and innocent in one expression. It was a trick, and he'd practiced. I detest the suggestion. My work is for the living. Klein, Wolfe said without turning, did you ever give Mr. Reese access to Rusterman's seal or to my house? No, Klein said, appalled. I wouldn't. Then we have this, Wolfe said, and lifted the pantry note with 2 fingers. A message left in my kitchen by someone who believes corruption begins at home. He is correct in one regard. Corruption begins where standards are most visible, but it does not end there. His eyes went to Reese. Mr. Reese, you are visible. Reese gave me his version of a shrug. You've built a delicious theory. It lacks meat. Saul's voice came from the side, mild as a winter sun. Your courier ledger doesn't. Tuesday you signed a case out at Lara Quinn's building while she was at lunch. Told the doorman you were with Aromatis. And had a bicycle boy, hello Cosmo, carry it to your car around the corner. You returned the case an hour later without the internal seal strip. Yesterday you collected a florist's envelope and paid cash from a money order bought at a bodega next to the cask. Today, you shadowed Cosmo to his garage long enough to scare him into not talking. Bad luck that bartenders remember faces. Reese's smile didn't crack. It thinned. This is all very theatrical. It is all very arithmetic, Wolfe said. And there is an extra sum. Mr. Reese, you were in my house. When Mr. Dax came with his letter and his bluff, you came with him. You left nothing then but attention. Later, you came with your blue roses and left cheap wax on my blotter and a hair on my knob in 2 pieces. Tonight, you meant to enjoy the harvest. The embassy disgraced, Rustermans ruined, and me implicated as a man who cannot keep his own seal secure. He leaned a fraction forward. Pfui, you are a clerk with delusions. You despise standards because they exclude you, so you mimicked them and called it cleverness. You mistook proximity for power. Reese's eyes cut to Dax as if to find footing. Dax stared back, calculating whether to jettison dead weight and deciding on yes. If Mr. Reese exceeded his mandate, he said softly, he will no longer be employed. Reese's head snapped. Exceeded? You told me to make you a legend. He spat, proof erupting where caution would have lived in a wiser man. You said Nero Wolfe needed to be humbled. Rustermans needed to learn that scent belongs to those who can bottle it. That will suffice, Wolfe said, and the softness was gone. Mr. Goodwin. I was already moving. You don't wait for a man like Reese to turn his confession into exit. Saul moved too, not because he doubted me, but because he enjoys symmetry. We didn't have to get rough. Reese wasn't built for rough. He looked, for a second, like a boy who discovered that a locked door is not the same as a safe room. Sit, I told him. He sat. Wolfe inhaled once, as if the room had been reset to its rightful odor. Mr. Gauthier, he said, you will press charges for assault with a harmful agent and attempted mass poisoning. Mr. Dax will sign a statement describing Mr. Reese's access to his facilities and vials, and his dismissal for cause. Miss Quinn will provide her analysis and her memo warning against chromatone, which Mr. Reese ignored. Mr. Klein will attach a letter of apology for his smaller folly and agree to testify to Mr. Reese's presence at Rustermans under the guise of quality control. Mr. Leary will admit to being used and name Mr. Reese as the man who used him. I will give the embassy their bottle as evidence and my assurance that New York's sense of proportion is not entirely dead. He let the assignment stand like a menu read by a king. Then he looked at Reese. As for you, sir, you will understand something. Standards are not your enemy. They are what keep men like you from turning taste into tyranny. You tried to degrade a ritual to prove that nothing is real. Unfortunately for you, reality is stubborn. You are caught by the thing you do not believe in. Reese stared at the embassy bottle, then at the pantry note, then at the monogram head wrapped in muslin. He had the good sense not to speak. The room exhaled, each according to lung and guilt. Fritz appeared as if conjured, and I saw in his jaw a particular satisfaction. The kitchen had been invaded, and now the invader was about to be served to someone who would not overcook him. I rang the 9th and spoke to a lieutenant who knows our address too well. When he heard synthetic compound, embassy, and attempted, his voice got very specific, very fast. When the uniforms came, Reese went with a small, brittle dignity, like glass, deciding to be sand again. Dax signed what Wolfe had typed with a flourish that tried to look like atonement and looked like survival. Klein's signature was careful, and for the first time that week he looked like he might sleep. Lara handed over her vial and her memo with relief. Gauthier pressed Wolfe's hand, then mine, then Fritz's, which is like kissing a church. Cosmo muttered his guilt into Saul's patient ear. Saul filed it under recoverable. When the last guest left, the house took back its shape. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. The truffle on the credenza sent a small, true breath into the room, as if to ask whether men would ever deserve it. You were right, I said, because sometimes the obvious should be honored. About what? Wolfe murmured. About the note, I said. Corruption begins at home. He meant your house. You made it mean his. Wolfe's mouth made that small line that passes for a smile with him. I meant, he said, what I always mean, that appetite without conscience is merely hunger. We have fed the latter and preserved the former. He opened his eyes and looked at the embassy bottle under glass, then at the sealed muslin bundle, then at the pantry note in its envelope. He waved one finger. Dispose, he said, not ceremoniously, efficiently. Done, I said. And dinner? He sighed. Fritz, he called, something honest. Always, Fritz said from the hall, and his voice, for the first time in 2 days, had light in it. By the next afternoon, the brownstone was itself again, quiet, immaculate, and full of the faint smell of time and order. The police had come and gone, the press had been diverted, and Reese was cooling in a holding cell somewhere, wondering when self-importance had turned into a felony. Wolfe hadn't moved since breakfast, except to change beer bottles, and Fritz was downstairs conducting an exorcism of the kitchen with vinegar and opera. I sat opposite Wolfe with my notebook, mostly for show. You know, I said, for a case that started with a stolen fungus, it grew into quite a bouquet. Wolfe grunted. That was his version of applause. Dax gets to keep his company, Klein gets to keep his dignity, and Rustermans gets to keep its truffle supply, I continued. And you get another headline without having to leave your chair. Everybody wins. Except Mr. Reese, Wolfe murmured. He won precisely what he wanted. Attention, only he mistook infamy for achievement. He sipped his beer and looked at me. Vanity, Archie, is never satisfied until it ruins itself. Some men build things to be admired, I said. Reese built things to be noticed. Precisely. Wolfe leaned back. That is the modern condition, confusing being observed with being valued. He wished to make himself visible by poisoning taste itself, an act of philosophical vandalism. Pfui. He closed his eyes a moment, as if wiping the air clean of memory. The truffle, however, its integrity was preserved. Fritz tells me it was magnificent. Yeah, I said, though I'm beginning to think the thing's cursed. Every time one of those fungi crosses our doorstep, somebody ends up confessing, fainting, or handcuffed. That is not the truffle's doing, Wolfe said dryly. It merely exposes men who cannot smell truth without trying to imitate it. The afternoon light shifted across the rug, making gold stripes on the desk. Wolfe reached for the orchid register, the day returning to its natural rhythm, the great detective and his small world restored. After a long silence, he said almost absently, "It is an unpleasant truth, Archie, that civilization hangs by the thread of restraint. Every man carries a little Reese in him, something that whispers, if I could only leave my mark, even by ruining perfection." He looked at me then, eyes open and sharp. Our task is to keep that whisper out of the kitchen. I smiled. And here I thought our task was just keeping the beer cold. He gave me a look that said I'd earned only half the joke and reached for another bottle. Fritz appeared right on cue with a tray of roast duck and sauce chasseur, looking serene again now that the brownstone's sanctity had been restored. As he set the plates down, Wolfe inhaled, then nodded once, satisfied. "Ah," he said, "authentic, aromatic, honest." "Unlike most of the suspects we meet," I said. "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. "Dinner, Archie." So we did. And outside, the city buzzed, full of men chasing counterfeit scents. Inside, at least for that night, there was order, the truest aroma in the world. Roma in the world, 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 Roma in the world,